welcome to another in the series of AARP Maryland's Brain Health. These are interviews in which we talk with people about matters of the mind. And today we have the good fortune to have with us Matt Alderton. Alderton, I said it wrong. I apologize. Matt Alderton, who is a freelance writer, and he writes often for AARP. But in addition to that, he's a journalist and writes for a variety of publications, USA Today, The Washington Post, and many others. And recently, he's been writing about happiness based on going out and interviewing a lot of experts on happiness. And so we thought it would be an interesting idea to have a conversation about the difficulty many of us are finding being happy during the troubling times in which we're living. I don't know about you, Matt, but for me, for everybody I know, watching the news is often so intensely depressing that we wonder how we're going to get on from there. I mean, between the political divide in America, in which people on the right think that people on the left are going to destroy the country, and people on the left think that people on the right are going to destroy the country, and people have stopped talking to each other. There's tremendous anger that's emerged, the social division that comes out of that, which is very difficult. And of course, in the world is very troubled. The issues about Ukraine, the issues in the Middle East, these are really difficult times. And many people, of course, hear reports every day about storms that haven't happened of this magnitude maybe ever in history. And what does that mean for the future of our planet and of humanity? These are troubling times for people. So the question we thought we'd explore today is, well, how do you manage to find some happiness in the midst of all of this? And we're very pleased that you're joining us because you've been out there talking to the experts. So we're just wondering, what have you learned from them that would be helpful?
Well, thanks for having me, Michael. I really appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Happiness, as you said, it's one of those really elusive things these days. There's a lot competing for our attention, a lot competing for our emotions. And it's been a privilege of mine to speak to so many experts about happiness. And I've learned an awful lot. But the number one thing that I've learned is to focus on the things that we can control. Whether it's the weather and natural disasters, or politics, or any number of the things that you mentioned, we can't control those things. But the one thing we can control is ourselves and the things that we do and the way that we react. And so that's number one, is to focus on ourselves internally and less externally. That's where I start.
Well, that's really interesting. Of course, there are many things that we can control. So what direction would you, of the things that we can control, what would you suggest based on what you've been learning?
Well, I think there's kind of four major areas that we can control. Number one is our relationships. Number two is our activities, the things that we do. Number three is kind of how we take care of ourselves, and number four is really, I think, it's kind of this sense of wonder and cultivating sense of surprise and awe in the world. Those are the kind of four things that I really learned at a high level from the experts that I've interviewed. And then the first one, I think let's start with relationships. I interviewed a researcher who's been involved with the Harvard study of adult development. And this is the largest study of happiness and adult life in history. The researcher interviewed something like 700 men over the span of more than 80 years to see kind of how their lives changed and evolved and what made them happy over the years. And the number one thing that they found in this study is that our personal relationships, that is the biggest trigger of happiness. And I don't know about you, but for me, that certainly rings true. You know, I can do any number of things alone and by myself, and that brings a certain type of contentment. But other people certainly bring a new level of joy, and that's certainly something I found in my life.
I think that's very important. There was an article recently that I read in which I'm trying to remember who wrote it, but it said basically that when you look at lives that are happy lives, marriage specifically in this case, but relationships were more important than career in achieving real satisfaction in life. So I think that's consistent with what you're saying here.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's important too to think about different levels of relationships. What the researchers found is that we really need depth to our relationships. You know, it's great to have a neighbor who you wave to. That's wonderful. But it's more important to have people who really know you, who know who you are. And that requires a little bit of vulnerability on our part. It requires some risk taking to talk to other people about things that scare us and embarrass us. That's really where that depth comes from. And the more depth you have in your relationships, researchers have found it seems that the happier you are. So I thought that was really interesting.
Well, I think that is interesting and certainly important, but it also strikes me, and you've written about this as well, that our relationships with people who are fundamentally strangers, maybe we shouldn't call them relationships.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah,
many of us have a lot of fun with people we don't know at all well.
absolutely. I think we need different types of relationships in our lives, right? We need those really deep, vulnerable connections, but I think it's just as important to have I think they called it in a movie, I think the movie Fight Club, single serving friendships, right? I think, yeah, I think those are really important too. I interviewed a woman who she has a project she calls it the 50 States Project, and her goal is to visit each of 50 states and meet a stranger and share a meal with them. And she found that extremely fulfilling because she loves to travel, but traveling alone can be a little bit lonely. And so it gave her a way to experience new places, but have companionship. She'll learn new things. And it just really enriched her life to meet all these different people from different walks of life. And so I think there's a spectrum. It's important to be open to new people, but it's equally important to cultivate deeper relationships with the people you already know.
Well, the person you're talking about had a quite structured approach to having contact with strangers. Don't you think that for a lot of us, just if I can use the word schmoozing, you know, we come in contact with people all the time. So,
yeah. I think it's also, you know, part of the reason, from speaking for myself, relationships can be overwhelming because we make big work of it. To your point, I mean, it's having a big project where you're going to go out and meet strangers in this systematic way. That's overwhelming, right? But you don't need to make big work of it. I think that one of the experts I interviewed is Gretchen Rubin, who's author of The Happiness Project, and she has a practice that she does with her friends and family that's designed to make this as little work as possible. Once a week, she sends an email, and it's just she calls it the update. And the update is just a touch point. It's really casual. She does not, spell check or grammar. She does not compose it. It's just, hey, here's something that's going on in my life. It could be a little vignette. It could be, oh, the dog went crazy at the mailman today. And it's just this act of staying in touch. And it's not a lot of time. It's not a lot of commitment. It's not a lot of work. But just that act of making that connection, she finds really fulfilling and really the key to her happiness.
There are a number of things that come to mind. I said it a minute or two ago, we all come in contact with a lot of people, but of course that's not true. And one of the big issues during the pandemic, and it continues to some extent now, and that is the people who are isolated. who really don't have much contact with people. So I'm inferring from what you say that maybe a first thing to say here is don't just stay at home alone on your couch
Yeah.
or whatever furniture you choose to sit on. Get out there, get in contact with people, which of course, as you're pointing out, can be done virtually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And
but
that, that leads really well into kind of the second area that I had mentioned, which is it's not just who we associate with, but what we do, the activities we do. And oftentimes those two things are really, really closely related.
Mhm.
So if you're struggling to meet people and you need more connections in your life, you should really think about the activities that you're doing. Do things that you love. You join a group, you join an activity, and it can be virtual as well. One of the experts I interviewed talked about there was this woman who was really interested in, I believe it was bears, and there's this community of bear lovers, enthusiasts, and they watch videos. There's live streams of the bears in Alaska. And by participating in this activity that she just naturally loved, she became part of a community. They would all chat and talk about these bears and these live streams. And what she found was one day she got really sick, and she wasn't in the live stream. She wasn't in the chat. Nobody had heard from her. And these people who she had never met actually reached out to check on her. And unbeknownst to her, just by doing something she loved, she had inadvertently made friendships and people who were invested in her and cared about her. So that's just one example of doing something that we love as a pathway to meeting people that we love.
And as you're pointing out, it clearly is very important to have things to do that you find engaging, and part of it is finding things that are pleasurable. Maybe some people don't even have to find it; it's just there for them, right? But also getting some sense of meaningfulness.
Sure. I think there's studies that people who volunteer, for instance, or perform acts of kindness, they get something called a helper's high, and it's it's this rush of endorphins. It makes you feel good to help others. And so yes, activities can be fun, but they can also be enriching in other ways, and volunteering, giving back, being involved in a faith community or something spiritual. Those can bring a lot of value as well.
So we should talk for a second about faith and spiritual communities and how important that is in the lives of many people.
Yeah, I think I think one of it is again social. It's a way to make connections, but there's also this idea of connecting to something bigger than ourselves. One of the several of the experts I interviewed actually talked about cultivating. They call it awe, AWE. There's you could also call it wonder. Any number of things you could call it, but it's this idea of looking for something bigger. And a lot of people find that in faith. Others find it in nature. They find it in art. It's just this feeling that there's that we as individuals are smaller than and just a piece of a larger puzzle. And I think that's a really important feeling when we're talking about how to be happy, because we have to feel like we have a purpose and that there's meaning and that there's is something to discover.
It strikes me you're talking about people finding ways to get not just beyond themselves, but also beyond this day-to-day world. Started out by saying we're living in very troubling times. It's difficult to watch the news and not walk away in tears.
Yeah.
But I think what you're saying is that people who can somehow transcend or have a sense of a transcendence of this troubled world to something that is, how does one describe it, right?
Yeah.
Meaningful, vibrant, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, to your point, we can, we have a choice to make every day. Again, going back to what we can control, right? We can sit on our phones and we can doom scroll and read all the headlines, or we can go out for a walk and look for things that are beautiful to us. We can go to a museum and see something new. That's a choice that we can make. We can stew in the negativity, or we can go out and find something that makes us joyful.
I think it's very important that you've mentioned that art is one of the ways in which people can do this. I mean, this is AARP. I'm an old person. We're talking presumably to people who are mostly older than you are, Matt, from the look of it, over 50. And particularly as one approaches retirement, what can you do? What can you do becomes an important question. And one of the answers you've given already, which is get out and volunteer, whether for AARP or something else, but do something that makes a contribution to the world. That's a great antidote to depression.
It is.
Getting involved in artistic activity.
Yeah. It's not just consuming art. Consuming art is incredibly beneficial, but it's making art. There are countless studies on the benefits of making art. It has physiological and mental benefits. And art can be defined in any number of ways, right? You don't have to be a great painter. You can dance. You can write, any number of things that flex your creative muscles. All of those things have had really proven benefits in terms of our mood and how we feel. Another thing that I found is collecting. I interviewed one expert who talked about the joys of collecting, and that's really joyful for a few reasons. It's the hunt. Right. And this, you get this endorphin rush when you find a new item for your collection. It's tapping again into this element of awe and wonder and surprise. If you're at a flea market looking for an antique and you find this amazing piece, it's this moment of surprise. And it's pride. It's, if you display your collection, it gives you something to be proud of, and it feels like this tangible thing. So that's another example of something that I found.
Well, the other thing that strikes me is that there are a lot of people who get joy from things like golf or other athletics.
Yeah, athletics are incredibly important, not just for the joyful aspect of it, but it taps into my third area that I mentioned at the start of our conversation, which is really self-care and health and wellness. Golf, people don't think of golf as exercise, but it is. You're walking, and walking is one of the most wonderful things you can do for your health. And when we're talking about happiness, being healthy is important, because we can't do the things that make us happy if we're not well enough and able enough to do them. So exercise, diet, sleep, these are things that are really important for our happiness. Not in necessarily a direct way, but certainly in an indirect sort of way.
Well, we should talk some more about that. There is a sense these days that there are 4 things that you really have to do to take care of yourself. One of which you haven't touched on, and that is, there's a lot of talk these days about managing your stress. Mm-hmm. And I love it when people talk about mindfulness. I still haven't quite figured out what that is. But stress, dealing with stress. But then the others are the ones that you just mentioned, and that is to exercise, eat well, and sleep well.
Yeah.
I find each of those not so easy.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough. But I think if you think about those things as levers for happiness, I think it goes a long way towards making those things happier, or easier rather. I don't love to run, but when I think about it as something that's going to unlock lots of benefits for me, it becomes a lot easier for me to get out there and do it. But you have to redefine exercise for yourself too. I said art doesn't have to be painting. Well, exercise doesn't have to be running. Exercise can be gardening. It can be.
Well, thank God it doesn't have to be running.
It can be gardening. It could be, again, dancing. I said dancing with art. It can be anything that gets your heart rate up. You have to kind of rethink. We all have these preconceived notions of what it means to eat well and exercise. And I think we have to challenge ourselves to think outside the box a little bit.
So if we pursue that, you apparently are a pretty rational guy, Matt.
I try.
You've persuaded yourself that it's actually good for you to run, so you run.
Sure.
You run whether you like it or not on certain days. I think that's really tough for a lot of people.
It is. And that's why, happiness is not, there's no perfect recipe. These are different levers you can pull, right? If you don't feel like exercising, well, then go back to the top of our conversation and meet a friend. It's choose your own adventure, if you will. But these are all things that you can do to kind of search for that elusive happiness that we're talking about.
So let's talk about eating well. See, and you look like a guy who's in good shape. I'm a pudgy old man. And,
you look pretty good, Michael.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. But to be more serious about it, the United States is now the most obese nation in the world. Turn on the television and you can see delectable cheeseburgers that are covered with all sorts of things which are really terrible for us to eat. Oops, yeah. I didn't say that. We'll get sued by somebody for blaming this on fast food. But I mean, we are inundated with inducements to eat more and more and to eat things which are not really healthy. I sympathize with people who.
Well, the good news here for people who don't like to eat healthy, there's a silver lining here, and everything in moderation, right? But there's a scientific term for this. I believe it's called food memory. And it's basically by eating those indulgent things that we love, again, in moderation every once in a while, but eating the things that are bad for us can also be good for us from the standpoint of happiness, because this principle called food memory, it taps into things that have been encoded in our brains. So, if you grew up eating fast food with your family, if that was a big treat for you, then eating it now can unlock these memories and these really feel good emotions. And that's, I think, why a lot of people that's why they call it comfort food, right? So that's the good news, is that you can get some benefit, if you eat your favorite junk foods.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I would think that one of the antidotes to watching the news is to have a big bowl of ice cream afterwards.
It works for me, for sure.
And sleeping, also challenging.
Yeah.
Again, all you have to do is watch television to see all the advertising for things that can help people to sleep. I don't know the numbers, but my guess is at least half the people in the United States don't sleep well.
Yeah.
And the world that we're living in doesn't help. I don't know how many people wake up in the middle of the night with some of the visions that they see on the television news. I mean, it's so god awful, some of the things that we see.
Yeah.
Sleeping well is good advice, but it's tough.
Yeah. It's really tough. I think, to your point, one of the best things you can do to sleep better is to not watch the news before bed. It's important to be informed, but maybe you be informed in the morning instead of the evening, right? That's one important thing. One of the most useful practices that I heard from one of the experts that I interviewed is we all set an alarm to get up in the morning, but how about you set an alarm to go to bed at night? If you're not getting enough sleep, you might be staying up too late, and that's something I certainly struggle with. I don't have a problem waking up in the morning. My body alarm just naturally goes, but I need to be reminded to go to bed. And so that's one little trick that I learned that might help some people get a little bit more sleep.
That is interesting. And of course, there's a whole field of sleep hygiene out there. And it may be that there are some things in that are helpful to us. Well, there's certainly some things in that which are helpful to some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Things like having a dark room, a cool room, have the temperature in your room, no lights, no screens before bed. Those are all kind of, what we call sleep hygiene.
Well, personally, I find it too regimented to do all those things. So.
Fair.
But then I don't sleep well, so
you got to do what works for you, for sure.
We're getting down to the end of our time. I wanted to circle back to where you started. You started by saying that we need to distinguish between the things we can control and the things we can't control. And we've been talking about presumably things that we can control. I think it's really tough to get yourself to exercise, eat well, and but these are areas over which we have personal control. But I'm wondering to what extent it is helpful to people to actually engage in activities about the things we can't control. So, for example, getting actively involved in politics. This is AARP. We don't take sides. You're on the right, you're on the left. But if you're on the right or on the left and you believe that the world is about to go to hell because the others are doing the terrible things that they're doing, do you think, or don't you think it's beneficial to then get involved in some activity that tries to change the circumstances that are so disturbing?
I think that can go any number of ways. I can certainly appreciate that hypothesis. I think, for a lot of people, if we're talking about how to be happy, that actually might be counterproductive, because if you can't make the changes that you want to make, that can be a frustrating experience. So I think that you can get a lot of things out of those activities. You can get learning, you can get enrichment. But can we get happy? I don't know. What I would say in terms of engaging in those activities, I think it's about exploring things that are contrary to your beliefs. If you're going to engage in politics, perhaps it's exploring the other side. Again, that will form new connections, new relationships. It's something new to you. One thing that we haven't discussed here, this is a little bit of a tangent, but is the importance of trying new things. I spoke with one woman who interviewed, she's a writer, and she interviewed a woman who is in her 60s and tried a new adventurous water sport. Wakeboarding, I think, is what she tried. And this unlocked in her this whole new. It proved to her that even at her age, she could do new things. She could challenge herself. She could achieve things she didn't think she could do. And so when we're talking about engaging in world-changing activities, I think from that perspective, it can be really valuable. But don't just go do things that are going to scratch your same old itches. Do something new, is what I would say.
Well, that's interesting. I do think that some people get tremendous satisfaction about in trying to change the world.
Absolutely.
And that trying and failing is not necessarily frustrating and unhappy making.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I think you make a really great point. I think it's important to not be too cynical, right? And I think that getting out there and being active, however you define active, whether that's being civically engaged or physically engaged, any number of ways, getting up and doing something is certainly better than doing nothing, and that will bring a lot more happiness, I believe.
We have reached the last 10 seconds. So maybe we should end on that note. I want to thank you, Matt, for joining us today. I've certainly found this an interesting conversation. I hope you have found it interesting. Hope our listeners have. And once again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Be well.